Welcome back to Dat Build. We are looking at our 1989 Porsche Turbo Replica. We're going to be working a bit more on today, but more so looking at the further issues of the actual car itself. There are quite a number, so we'll go over them as much as possible and show you exactly what we'll have to deal with in order to get this back on the road. So if we start down here, mainly because this was the biggest thing I found when I actually inspected the car initially. The fiberglass to the base around the beam itself and everything is reasonably okay. However, when they've actually done the front section here, as you can kind of see, I can get my hand through here. Now, for whatever reason, and now my watch is stuck in there, and oh God, this is not going to end well. When they've actually done this, the front section here, as part of the actual space cage, is bolted to the section underneath, and that ties into the front end. They've essentially hacksawed out in this section here for the beam to go up and then across behind the dashboard. On top of everything else, I've got to cover these in because otherwise all debris from the wheels comes through into the cabin. Now, under here at the moment, we just have an empty cavity, obviously. The fuel tank will be replaced in the future, but for now we're just going to run a small jerry can going straight to the actual fuel pump. The thing that concerns me the most is actually the steering column. I haven't had a thorough inspection yet, but it does not seem to be lined up, and of course the cutout is not actually square. Now I'm sure when I remove the dashboard and see what's actually happening under there, I might be able to sort this out a bit easier, but at the moment when you turn the steering wheel, well, have a look for yourself. It's not the nicest sound, but beyond that, as you can see, this is kind of twisting, and I don't simply know if it's this cover here, like the actual inner shaft itself is properly aligned and this is simply out of whack, but I can't move that actual section. It seems to be a physical part of it, so I'm not sure if it's actually twisted in there. The sound, I assume, is just from rubbing internally and probably inside as well. As we can see from there, and I will take it in a bit closer, this I believe is where the battery used to be located. But as we can see, there is a rather nice and rather obvious, in what I consider, battery rust hole here. The actual outline itself is pretty much square. I'm guessing that this is where it would have been. As we can see, I can kind of put my finger in certain areas. The metal is rather thin and flimsy here. In front of that is pretty solid, actually. It's not too bad. So, to be really perfectly honest, I don't want to completely strip this chassis down. Let's try and do this as cheaply as possible, but not cheaping out. So this will simply cut out and have this section replaced. We'll keep the rest of it and simply treat the metal otherwise. I still have to actually go around the seams, and I do know there are a few nasty spots. I'll try and get a few of those filmed as well. But it's just the fact that all of this here needs to be replaced. It seems as though it's bottomed out or has possibly been jacked up from this location. Both the actual floor areas were concave. It's not too bad, but I honestly don't have any welding skills at all. So I'll probably have to get a shop to sort this part out. Now if we come down here a little further, the wiring itself, as you can see, I have no idea. It's a massive rat's nest under here. It is basically a tear down and restart, because honestly I've got that much exposed stuff, loose stuff, it just doesn't connect to anything. Obviously there are a number of switches and gauges, like these aren't even hooked up, they're completely just resting in there. But it is, like there is no lube over it, there's no attempt to cover it, it is simply resting on the floor and then drilled straight into the firewall for the back to lead into the motor for the starter and generator, and God, it is a horrible mess of wiring in here. I don't mind redoing wiring. To be honest, it's one of the things I'm more happy to actually tackle, but it is starting from scratch, yeah. Fixing someone else's doings, putting it nicely, that is just a completely different matter altogether. It is, yeah. One of the more pressing issues is, of course, the engine. So with this unit itself, again, 1.5 litre Volkswagen motor, nothing really too serious in terms of power to move this thing along at any sort of speeds, really. But the biggest problem is that, unfortunately, this was stored outside in the weather for a while. And as you saw yesterday, the actual engine lid itself did not have a cover leading directly over to the carburetor. Now, unfortunately, a bit of water ingress has made its way through, and of course, a number of other things under here are not in the greatest of all shapes. The fuel pump, I ended up completely tearing that thing apart. The bigger problem is, though, that, well, we did a little compression test, and as I'll show you now, it didn't really work well. So, I don't even know if this engine is going to run properly. I have already got a replacement carburetor coming. I'm not even going to bother rebuilding this one right here because I do not at all like the chances of it running properly. Beyond that, we do know the engine is going to be extremely low on power. Whether it will even fire with the way the actual compression is, well, we're just going to really yell at that one because why not? How much further can I damage this engine? So if we go to the back here, we have the rear end, which, well, it's not exactly tight. When I originally put this on the ground, moved it about, got in position, I noticed this wheel was kind of a little bit further into the guard with a bit more negative camber. Check the suspension, all the arms and everything like that seem okay. And of course, when you actually jack it up, drop it down, it's in the right position. So, that's got a bit of play there. Down here, as you can see, I removed the side skirt, which was so eloquently put on with a couple of screws. Underneath, which I will show you a bit closer, is the actual bottom section of the space frame. It is rather low. Having said that, the actual side skirts do go down that low to conceal it. So the lowest point of the car is essentially the side skirt bottom. But it is so chunky under here. And the problem is that it is the front section bolted to the midsection, which is then clamped on top of the actual Volkswagen pan. It's a really solid setup, absolutely. It's rusty. It really, really could do with a bit of TLC. I'm tossing up whether to have this thing removed, bead blasted, and then powder coated. It's a bit more of an expense. Maybe I simply go about just scrubbing it back and just touching it up with some rust-proof paint. I don't really know yet. I can't see the extent of it because it is so concealed. Onto the A-pillar. Onto the A-pillar itself. Where the actual door attaches, it's not really an issue because there is some substantial steel behind here. So it has been done right. It's secure, absolutely. But, and from what I can tell, the fiberglass here has been bonded to the steel. Now, that's not really great for a couple of reasons, but the main biggest concern though is that if I did want to actually take the space frame off the actual fiberglass body, this is going to prove quite a nightmare. Beyond that, I did actually try and mock up fit the actual genuine Porsche doors, and I got so far as to resting them in place, fit perfectly fine. The latches lined up, kind of. Here though, these have been drilled out completely incorrectly. So the factory doors do not line up to these holes. It would need to be re-drilled, reseated to make sure it's all level. And that just puts me in a bit of a predicament because to get that done, I need to get the frame sorted first. But then I need to get the fiberglass A-pillar windscreen sorted. To get the doors lined up, I need that fixed. that's essentially 3 places I'm going to have this car in order to get one problem fixed. Under here we can see a bit more of the mechanicals in terms of the brake system. At the moment there are no calipers on it. More about that later. But as we can see, if we delve a bit further, the actual frame back here, again a bit rotten just from the actual water. The fiberglass, where it's actually had the guards pop riveted onto the body, it is so thin skinned, and the problem is that in certain areas there is actually a gouge there. I don't know why, and it's not exactly lined up level, and by the same account as well, it's actually really thin threaded. There is next to nothing holding this guard onto here, despite how solid it is, and you know, that's a good sign, but that's going to need to be addressed too. I basically need to actually fill this out, put some proper nuts and bolts in there to hold it in place securely, and then of course have the actual rubber in there to stop water ingress getting through. So, and then of course beyond that, you can see further in, back into the cabin, and of course the bottom where it actually bolts the VW chassis to the actual space frame. Behind me here is the original rear wheel, which I've just taken off. This is actually the front wheel, which legally is even a little bit over the widest rim and tyre setup that I can go for this car. The way that our requirements work is that you can only go 50mm larger than the massive factory size, which for this car would essentially be a 15x5, I believe. It looks absolutely ridiculous. So there is an easy fix for this. And I say easy because it is simply changing a couple of parts which are factory Porsche parts. But they are rather difficult to find, especially in Australia, and beyond that then, there is a lot more work involved to actually correct that. I may end up looking at doing that because realistically, legally, if I want to actually drive this thing and not get an issue with this, is to have this rim on this car and essentially fix this setup at the back. I can always try and find another set of wheels, maybe have a 0 offset, that'll kind of pump it out, give me the nice bit of dish that I do like on these rims as it is. I don't mind these actual Remotech, aka ball bits now, but the problem is that this is not a legal setup, so I can't really run it on the roads without having troubles. So to finish up with today, I just want to go over a few things that will essentially need to be done in order for this car to actually be on the road in the future. I do have to actually conform to a few stringent rules. Luckily enough, this car actually can get away with a lot of the easiest stuff. I was worried that I would have to do so much to this thing, it just feasibly wouldn't be worth it. The trouble is that there is one particular thing that has to be done to this car, no ifs, buts or ands, that it kind of really put me off for a little bit. And I wasn't really sure if I wanted to continue with this build having to do this one thing. It's not a massive deal now I've thought about it, and because I have to do it if I ever want this thing to see the tarmac, is to essentially have a roll bar system in here. The reason being is that despite the fact you can buy a Porsche Cabrio looking exactly like this, A-pillar section, you know, cloth top, over the pool, the trouble is that this is not structural. I have thought about this really heavily, and if I can actually, in my head, envision the way it's going to look, then it's kind of going to dictate the way I make this car look in the end. Considering it's going to have a roll bar, and it basically will be a hoop system over the back where essentially the B-pillar section would be, it will come across, and it can more or less be like a Targa sort of setup where it's got a central bar where your panels would normally rest into. But it then will connect to the front section, leading down, and of course connecting to the space frame. Now I've asked, of course, if it can be a bolt-out system as opposed to a welded. It absolutely can, because at the end of the day, if for any reason I need to remove the body from the space frame, I can't exactly do that if the actual cage has been welded on. I did purely just want this, snap the roof on, etc. and so on. Given the fact we'll need to modify this in order to fit the roof anyway, it stands to reason that, well, I may as well make it work around this roll cage. So nice padding, stitching, all that sort of thing, make it look the part. The actual seats will change them to bucket and of course have a bit more control. Might even have a system to be able to put in a harness and all that sort of affair, but I reckon it can look really, really schmick if I do it right. So, with that being said, it will be a little race inspired. I may even do, stupidly, a bit of a gumball on the actual doors, bonnet and boot, some stripes maybe, who knows. It's probably going to be really posy by the end of it, but if I do it right, and I do want to do it right, I think it could look the part. And of course, it'll be a little bit different again, and if I can actually do some motorsport with it, then at least it's going to be purposeful and look really good. So, that's kind of the vision for this moving forward. Gives you a bit of an idea. Let's just see a few of the problems with the actual vehicle. I'm sure we'll find more once we actually start tearing into things. The next thing we're going to tackle is actually starting that engine. That's going to be a fun factor. I've got a new carburetor, electric fuel pump on the way. Once they've arrived, we are simply going to bolt them on, YOLO the engine. How much more damage can I do to it anyway, right? And then of course see what is what there. It's going to be loud. There is no muffler in this system at all. So see how we go there. As always, like and subscribe. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbours over the fence that you're having a dispute about. Loud dog, music, whatever, who cares. At the end of the day, if you do want to continue to watch what I'm doing here with this, you know where to find me. Until next time guys, cheers.